10 years earlier, Michael and Sarah had nothing. They lived in a tiny rented apartment on the outskirts of Lagos. The roof leaked during heavy rain, and the electricity often disappeared for hours. Some days they struggled to afford food. Other days they worried about paying rent. But despite their hardships, they were happy. Michael had a dream of becoming a successful businessman. Every evening he would sit at their small dining table making plans for the future. Sarah always sat beside him, listening carefully and encouraging him. Whenever Michael felt discouraged, Sarah reminded him to keep going. Whenever he wanted to quit, she motivated him to continue. When his first business failed, Sarah sold her jewelry to help him start again. When he couldn't afford transportation, she woke up earlier and walked to work so he could use the money for business meetings. Everyone around them could see how much Sarah believed in her husband. Neighbors often said Michael was lucky to have such a supportive wife. And they were right. Without Sarah's sacrifices, Michael would never have reached the success he dreamed about. But success has a way of changing people. Especially people who forget where they came from. Years later, Michael would remember these moments with deep regret. Because the woman he was about to humiliate was the same woman who helped build his future. After years of struggle, Michael finally achieved his dream. One business deal led to another. One client became 10 clients. Soon his company began generating more money than he ever imagined. The transformation happened quickly. The tiny apartment was replaced by a luxury mansion. The old second-hand car was replaced by expensive luxury vehicles. Designer suits filled his wardrobe. Wealthy people suddenly wanted to be his friend. For a while, Sarah celebrated his success. After all, they had worked together to reach this point. She believed their difficult years were finally behind them. But as Michael became richer, something inside him changed. He became obsessed with status. He became obsessed with appearances. And most importantly, he became obsessed with what other wealthy people thought about him. The humble man Sarah married slowly disappeared. In his place stood someone different. Someone who measured people's value by their bank accounts. Someone who cared more about wealth than loyalty. At first the changes were small. Then they became impossible to ignore. Sarah noticed it. Friends noticed it. Even family members noticed it. But nobody realized how far Michael would eventually go. As Michael's wealth increased, his attitude towards Sarah began changing. He no longer valued her opinions. He rarely asked for her advice. The woman who once helped him make important decisions was now treated like an outsider. At business dinners, Michael often interrupted her. At social events, he ignored her. Whenever she spoke, he acted as if her words carried no importance. Sarah tried to convince herself it was temporary. Perhaps he was stressed. Perhaps success brought new pressures. Perhaps things would improve. But deep inside, she knew the truth. Michael was becoming someone she barely recognized. One evening, during a dinner with wealthy friends, Sarah shared a simple suggestion regarding one of Michael's investments. Before she could finish speaking, Michael laughed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said jokingly, "please don't take financial advice from someone who has never made serious money." The table erupted with laughter. Sarah forced a smile. But inside, her heart broke. Nobody knew that the woman sitting quietly at the table understood investments better than anyone present. Because while Michael focused on spending money, Sarah had been quietly building wealth. Years before Michael became wealthy, Sarah developed a habit. Every month she saved money. Not large amounts. Small amounts. Money most people wouldn't notice. While Michael focused entirely on growing his business, Sarah studied finance, investments, and property ownership. She read books, attended seminars, listened to successful investors. Over time, she became incredibly knowledgeable. Using her savings, she purchased small investments. Then larger ones. Then larger ones again. Some investments failed. Others succeeded beyond expectations. As the years passed, her portfolio quietly expanded. Property values increased. Dividends accumulated. Business partnerships grew. The money continued multiplying. Yet Sarah never told anyone. Not because she wanted secrecy. Because she didn't care about recognition. She believed wealth should provide freedom, not attention. Even Michael remained completely unaware. He assumed Sarah depended entirely on him. He assumed everything they owned came from his success. That assumption was about to become the biggest mistake of his life. As their wedding anniversary approached, Michael planned an extravagant celebration. The guest list included wealthy investors, business executives, celebrities, and influential social figures. Everything had to be perfect. The venue was luxurious. The decorations were expensive. The entertainment was world-class. Michael viewed the event as an opportunity to showcase his success. For weeks he talked about how impressive the celebration would be. Sarah listened quietly. Something felt different. Something felt wrong. Over the years she had tolerated Michael's arrogance. She had ignored his disrespect. She had forgiven countless humiliations. But recently his behavior had become unbearable. Every public appearance included a joke at her expense. Every gathering included another insult disguised as humor. Meanwhile, Michael had no idea that Sarah possessed a secret capable of shocking every person attending the party. A secret hidden inside a bank account. A secret worth millions. The anniversary celebration was only days away. And before the night ended, everyone would learn the truth. Including Michael. While Michael was busy building his business empire, Sarah was quietly building something of her own. Years earlier, when they were still struggling financially, Sarah made a promise to herself. No matter how little money she had, she would always save a portion of it. Some months it was only a few dollars. Other months it was slightly more. Most people would have considered the amount insignificant. But Sarah understood something important. Small habits create big results. Every week she deposited money into a separate account. She never touched it. She never bragged about it. She simply remained consistent. As time passed, the savings grew. Then Sarah began studying investment opportunities. She spent evenings reading books while Michael worked on his business plans. She watched educational videos. She learned from successful investors. The more she learned, the more confident she became. Unlike many people, Sarah wasn't interested in getting rich quickly. She focused on patience. She focused on discipline. She focused on long-term growth. Those decisions would eventually change her entire life. Meanwhile, Michael remained completely unaware. He believed Sarah spent her days shopping and managing the household. He never imagined she was quietly creating a financial future of her own. One afternoon, Sarah received an opportunity that most people ignored. A friend told her about a small piece of land located outside the city. The area wasn't popular. There were no luxury homes. No major businesses. No signs of rapid development. Most investors laughed at the idea. But Sarah saw potential. Using nearly all of her savings, she purchased the land. It was a frightening decision. If the investment failed, she could lose everything she had worked for. But she trusted her research. Years passed. Slowly, development reached the area. Roads were built. Businesses arrived. Property values increased dramatically. The land Sarah purchased for a small amount became worth many times more. Instead of celebrating publicly, she quietly sold part of the property and reinvested the profits. Then she repeated the process again. And again. Each successful investment created another opportunity. Little by little, Sarah's wealth started growing. Not through luck. Not through inheritance. Through patience and smart decisions. Over the next several years, Sarah continued investing. She purchased additional properties. She invested in small businesses. She acquired shares in growing companies. Whenever profits arrived, she reinvested them. She refused to waste money on luxury items. While many people spend their earnings trying to look rich, Sarah focused on becoming wealthy. The difference was enormous. Slowly her investments multiplied. Rental income began arriving every month. Business profits increased. Dividend payments accumulated. Her financial portfolio expanded far beyond what anyone imagined. Even financial advisors were impressed. Some encouraged her to enter larger investment markets. Others wanted to partner with her. Sarah listened carefully but remained cautious. She never allowed greed to control her decisions. Her goal wasn't fame. Her goal wasn't status. Her goal was security. The security she never had while growing up. The security she wanted regardless of what happened in life. Ironically, the person who underestimated her the most was her own husband. By the 7th year of Michael's success, Sarah's financial position had become extraordinary. Multiple properties generated income. Several businesses produced steady profits. Investment accounts continued growing. And hidden among those assets was one particular bank account. An account Michael had never seen. An account Sarah never discussed. An account worth millions. Every statement showed increasing balances. Every year brought greater growth. Yet Sarah treated the money exactly the same way she treated her first savings deposit. With humility. She continued living modestly. She continued helping relatives. She continued supporting charitable projects. Nobody suspected the truth. Friends assumed Michael controlled all the wealth in the family. Business associates praised Michael's success. Even household staff believed Sarah depended entirely on her husband. The reality was completely different. In fact, Sarah's personal net worth had quietly grown larger than Michael's. And she achieved it without publicity. Without arrogance. Without humiliating others. The secret remained hidden. But not for much longer. The anniversary celebration was less than 24 hours away. Guests from across Lagos were expected to attend. Business leaders. Investors. Celebrities. Influential personalities. Michael spent the entire day making preparations. Everything needed to showcase his success. The decorations. The music. The food. The venue. He wanted everyone talking about the event for weeks. Meanwhile, Sarah sat quietly in her study reviewing a folder. Inside were investment records. Property ownership documents. Business contracts. And statements from the secret bank account. Years of discipline were organized neatly inside a single file. For a moment she stared at the documents. Not because she planned to embarrass Michael. Not because she wanted revenge. But because she was tired. Tired of being underestimated. Tired of being mocked. Tired of remaining silent while others assumed she had achieved nothing. She closed the folder and placed it beside her handbag. Tomorrow would change everything. Tomorrow the truth would finally be revealed. And once that happened, nobody would ever look at Sarah the same way again. Especially Michael. The anniversary celebration finally arrived. For weeks, Michael had planned every detail to perfection. The event was being held inside one of Lagos' most luxurious hotels. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Expensive decorations filled every corner. Live musicians entertained arriving guests. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Business executives, celebrities, politicians, and wealthy investors slowly filled the ballroom. Everything looked perfect. Exactly the way Michael wanted. As guests arrived, they congratulated him on his success. Many praised his business achievements. Others admired his luxurious lifestyle. Michael smiled proudly. He enjoyed the attention. He enjoyed the admiration. Most importantly, he enjoyed being seen as one of the city's most successful businessmen. Meanwhile, Sarah stood quietly beside him. Wearing a beautiful but simple dress, she greeted guests with kindness and grace. Unlike Michael, she wasn't interested in impressing anyone. She simply wanted the evening to pass peacefully. But deep inside, she sensed something was coming. Over the years, Michael had developed a habit of humiliating her during public gatherings. And tonight, surrounded by hundreds of people, she feared it might happen again. What neither Michael nor the guests realized was that before the night ended, the spotlight would shift completely. And the person everyone underestimated would become the center of attention. As the evening progressed, guests enjoyed dinner and entertainment. Laughter filled the room. Business deals were discussed. Champagne glasses clinked together. Eventually, the host invited Michael to the stage. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Michael smiled as he adjusted the microphone. At first, his speech seemed normal. He thanked his guest. He talked about his journey. He spoke about success and hard work. Then he turned toward Sarah. The audience smiled, expecting a romantic tribute. Instead, Michael began making jokes. At first, they seemed harmless. Then they became personal. Sarah has always been supportive, he said. But let's be honest, she's never understood how money really works. Several guests laughed. Michael continued. If I had listened to her financial advice over the years, I'd probably still be broke. More laughter followed. Sarah remained silent. The smile on her face barely moved. Inside, however, the words hurt deeply. Because Michael wasn't simply making jokes. He was disrespecting her in front of everyone she knew. Still, she said nothing. Michael interpreted her silence as weakness. And that mistake would cost him dearly. Encouraged by the crowd's reaction, Michael continued. Each joke became more insulting than the last. He mocked Sarah's simple lifestyle. He mocked her lack of interest in luxury. He mocked her financial knowledge. The audience laughed. Some people laughed because they found it amusing. Others laughed because Michael was powerful. A few looked uncomfortable. But nobody interrupted him. Sarah looked around the room. People she had welcomed into her home. People she had treated with kindness. People who knew almost nothing about her. Yet they laughed as if her value depended on Michael's opinion. For years she had tolerated similar moments. For years she had chosen patience over confrontation. But tonight felt different. Perhaps it was the years of disrespect. Perhaps it was the public humiliation. Or perhaps she simply realized she no longer needed to remain silent. As Michael prepared another joke, Sarah slowly stood from her chair. At first nobody noticed. Then nearby guests turned toward her. The room gradually became quiet. Something was changing. And everyone could feel it. The ballroom became unusually quiet. Michael noticed Sarah standing. For a moment he looked confused. This wasn't normal. Sarah rarely challenged him publicly. Then he noticed something else. She was holding a folder. A simple folder containing documents. Nothing more. Or so he assumed. Without speaking, Sarah calmly walked toward the stage. Hundreds of eyes followed her. The room felt frozen. Even the musicians stopped playing. Michael forced a smile. Trying to hide his discomfort. Sarah wants to say something, he joked nervously. But nobody laughed this time. There was something different about her expression. She wasn't angry. She wasn't emotional. She wasn't embarrassed. She looked confident. The confidence surprised everyone, including Michael. When Sarah reached the stage, she placed the folder on a nearby table. Then she slowly opened it. Inside were financial records, property documents, investment reports, and several bank statements. A few guests sitting close enough to see the papers exchanged confused looks. Michael still didn't understand what was happening. But he was about to. And once he did, his life would never be the same. Standing before hundreds of guests, Sarah finally picked up the microphone. The ballroom was completely silent. Even the staff stopped moving. Everyone wanted to know what was inside the mysterious folder. Sarah looked toward Michael. Then she looked at the audience. For several seconds she said nothing. The silence created even more tension. Finally, she spoke. I've listened to jokes about my finances for many years. Her voice remained calm. Professional. Confident. I've listened while people assumed I contributed nothing. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Many suddenly regretted laughing. Sarah continued. Tonight, I'd like to share something. She reached into the folder and removed several documents. Michael's smile disappeared. A strange feeling settled in his stomach. For the first time all evening, he felt nervous. Very nervous. Because deep inside, he realized something was wrong. Something he didn't understand. Something completely unexpected. Sarah raised the first document for everyone to see. And in that moment, the anniversary celebration transformed into something entirely different. The truth was finally ready to emerge. And when it did, nobody in that room would ever forget it. The ballroom was completely silent. Hundreds of guests stared at Sarah as she stood confidently on stage. Only minutes earlier, she had been the target of Michael's jokes. Now she had everyone's attention. Sarah slowly lifted the first document from the folder. Her hands were steady. Her expression was calm. There was no anger in her voice. No desire for revenge. Only truth. For many years, she began, people assumed I depended entirely on my husband. Several guests lowered their eyes. They knew she was talking about them too. Sarah continued. Tonight, I would like to correct that misunderstanding. She handed the document to the event host. The host adjusted his glasses and examined the papers. At first, his expression remained neutral. Then his eyes widened. The audience noticed immediately. Something important was written on those pages. Very important. The host looked at Sarah. Then at Michael. Then back at the document. Finally he spoke. This appears to be proof of ownership for several commercial properties. A murmur spread through the crowd. Michael frowned. Commercial properties. What commercial properties? Sarah owned property. The information made no sense. As the audience whispered among themselves, Sarah calmly reached for another document. The revelation had only just begun. Sarah placed additional documents on the table. One by one. Property records. Business ownership certificates. Investment statements. The host continued reading. Each new page seemed more unbelievable than the last. The audience watched in stunned silence. The woman they assumed was financially dependent owned apartment buildings, commercial centers, rental properties, business partnerships, and several pieces of valuable land. Some investors in the room recognized the locations immediately. Those properties were worth millions. A respected real estate developer stood up. I know these properties, he said. The owner has been making incredible investments for years. The room erupted into whispers. Michael felt his heart pounding. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. For years he had treated Sarah like someone who knew nothing about business. Yet she had quietly built an investment portfolio most professionals would envy. The humiliation he intended for her was slowly turning against him. And the worst part, the biggest secret still hadn't been revealed. Sarah waited until the room became quiet again. Then she opened a smaller envelope hidden inside the folder. The audience watched carefully. Even Michael stopped breathing. Sarah removed a bank statement. A single piece of paper. Yet it carried more power than anyone imagined. She handed it to the host. The host began reading. His expression changed instantly. Shock. Disbelief. Confusion. The audience leaned forward. "What is it?" someone shouted. The host looked speechless. For several moments he couldn't answer. Finally, he cleared his throat. "This statement belongs to Mrs. Sarah Johnson." The room remained silent. Then he read the account balance. The number echoed through the ballroom. Millions. Not thousands. Not hundreds of thousands. Millions. The reaction was immediate. Gasps filled the room. Several guests covered their mouths. Others stared at Sarah in complete disbelief. Michael felt the world spinning around him. The secret bank account contained more money than he had ever imagined. And it belonged to the woman he mocked in front of everyone. Everything changed in an instant. Just minutes earlier, Michael was the center of attention. The successful businessman. The respected entrepreneur. The powerful husband. Now nobody was looking at him. They were looking at Sarah. Guests approached her. Investors congratulated her. Business leaders shook her hand. People who laughed at Michael's joke suddenly felt embarrassed. The mood inside the ballroom shifted completely. Michael stood alone near the stage. For the first time in years, he experienced the same humiliation he had forced Sarah to endure. Except this humiliation wasn't created by insult. It was created by truth. A wealthy investor approached Michael. "Your wife is extraordinary," he said. "I had no idea she was such a successful investor." Michael couldn't respond. Because neither did he. Every assumption he made about Sarah was collapsing before his eyes. Every joke suddenly looked cruel. Every insult suddenly looked foolish. And everyone in the room could see it. As the applause slowly faded, Sarah picked up the microphone one final time. The room became quiet again. She looked toward Michael. Not with anger. Not with hatred. But with disappointment. A disappointment far more painful. "For years," she said softly, "I never cared who earned more money." The audience listened carefully. "I cared about respect." Silence filled the ballroom. Money was never the problem. Sarah paused. The problem was believing wealth made one person more valuable than another. Many guests lowered their heads. Because the lesson wasn't only for Michael. It was for everyone. Then Sarah looked directly into her husband's eyes. "The saddest part is that you never took the time to know who I really was." Michael felt tears forming. For the first time that evening, he understood the damage he had caused. Not because she was secretly wealthy. Because he had spent years disrespecting the person who loved him most. The ballroom remained silent. The truth had finally been revealed. And Michael knew his life would never be the same again. After the anniversary party ended, Michael returned home alone. For years, he had been the most confident person in every room he entered. But that night was different. The image of Sarah standing on stage replayed endlessly in his mind. The property documents. The investment records. The secret bank account. The shocked faces. Most painful of all was the look in Sarah's eyes. Not anger. Disappointment. For the first time in years, Michael saw himself clearly. He remembered every joke he made. Every insult disguised as humor. Every moment he dismissed Sarah's opinions. Every time he treated her as if she were less important than him. The memories felt unbearable. As midnight approached, Michael sat alone in his study. The mansion suddenly felt empty. The expensive furniture no longer impressed him. The luxury cars parked outside no longer mattered. None of it mattered. Because he realized something important. Sarah had never asked him for wealth. She had never asked him for luxury. She only wanted respect. And he failed to give it to her. That night, Michael didn't sleep. He spent hours staring at old photographs from the early years of their marriage. Photos from when they were poor. Photos from when they were happy. Photos from before success changed him. For the first time in his life, he understood that losing someone's respect hurts far more than losing money. And he feared he might have lost Sarah forever. The next morning, Michael drove to Sarah's office. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about business. He wasn't thinking about money. He wasn't thinking about status. He was thinking about forgiveness. As he entered the building, employees greeted him politely. Many now knew exactly who Sarah was. And many respected her greatly. Michael felt nervous. More nervous than any business meeting in his life. When he entered Sarah's office, she was reviewing documents. She looked up calmly. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence felt heavy. Finally, Michael stepped forward. "Sarah." His voice cracked. "I was wrong." Sarah remained quiet. Michael continued. "I spent years believing success made me better than other people." Tears filled his eyes. "I forgot who stood beside me when I had nothing." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Michael lowered his head. "I don't deserve forgiveness." The words were honest. Painfully honest. "But I am asking for it anyway." The powerful businessman who once mocked his wife stood completely broken. Not because he lost money. Because he finally understood what he almost lost. The woman who loved him. Sarah listened quietly. When Michael finished speaking, she stood and walked toward the window. The city skyline stretched across the horizon. For several moments, she said nothing. Then she spoke softly. "Do you know why I never told you about the investments?" Michael shook his head. "I wanted to see whether success would change you." The answer shocked him. Sarah turned toward him. "When we were poor, you respected everyone. When we became wealthy, you only respected people with money." Michael couldn't argue. Because it was true. Sarah continued. "The money was never important. The investments were never important. What mattered was character." She pointed toward the city outside. "There are many rich people in this city. But very few truly wealthy people." Michael looked confused. Sarah smiled sadly. "Rich people have money. Wealthy people have wisdom, respect, gratitude, and peace." The words hit him harder than any criticism. Because he finally understood. He had spent years becoming rich. While Sarah spent years becoming wealthy. And there was a huge difference between the two. Forgiveness came slowly. Sarah didn't magically forget the years of humiliation. Some wounds require time to heal. Michael understood that. For the first time in his life, he stopped demanding quick results. Instead, he focused on changing. He treated Sarah with respect. He listened when she spoke. He supported her projects. He learned from her investment experience. Months passed. Then a year. Gradually, Sarah noticed something different. Michael was no longer pretending. He was genuinely becoming a better person. The arrogant businessman was disappearing. The humble man she married was returning. Together they began supporting charities, funding scholarships, helping struggling families, creating opportunities for young entrepreneurs. For the first time in many years, they were working as a team again. Not because of money, because of shared values. The relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that made all the difference. Several years later, Michael often reflected on the anniversary party. The night that once felt humiliating eventually became the most important night of his life. Because it forced him to confront the truth. One evening, he stood beside Sarah on the balcony of their home. The sun slowly disappeared behind the city skyline. Below them, people hurried through their daily lives. Businesses opened and closed. Families shared meals. Dreams were being built. Michael smiled. Not because of the money they possessed, but because of the lesson he learned. Success means nothing without humility. Money means nothing without respect. And worth means nothing if you lose the people who helped you achieve it. He turned toward Sarah. "Thank you," he said quietly. Sarah smiled. "For what?" Michael looked at her. "For teaching me what real wealth looks like." As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, both of them knew the future would be different. Not because they were rich. Because they had finally learned what truly matters. And that lesson was worth more than every dollar in their bank accounts.